Hello, Republika. Hello, Jarek. In the best case, we get to know each other a bit. Basically, we're three of us here, Jarek, me, and DeepL, the company. It's a typical company in translation with a lot of aspects, like their main headquarters, which are in Cologne. But it's only one of 5 private, not publicly traded companies above 5 billion, a so-called unicorn. There is no classical Silicon Valley narrative. It's quality before growth. And a bit in the background, the founder has stayed a bit in the background. This interview is something really special, so thank you again for being here. As I said, I am here as a professional, as a researcher who has dealt a lot with digital infrastructure, data, and AI, and as a former supporter of digital technology and checking what successful development needs. But also privately, I have one parent who is not German, but I was raised only in German because in those days they thought that children could be confused by growing up bilingual. But a lot of things have changed since then. For instance, the environmental catastrophe of Chernobyl. But yeah, that wasn't the problem even then. So privately, I have an experience of exclusion with other languages because adults switch into them if you shouldn't hear something. So to come back to the topic, I did learn English after all, and became a researcher, and that's quite international. I work a lot in English, and that's how I became a DeepL power user in the last few years. Also, I think languages are something that can connect with the right I'm going into this as a researcher, as a citizen, and I would like to channel the audience with my questions, what they might want to know. So, translation as a competence. The diversification of language. The earliest texts we know are clay tablets from Mesopotamia, which have synonymous. In 2017, when you founded DeepL, could you already foresee that there would be a market for translation which is steadily growing, and your private experiences with language integration, and what do they have to do with your successful product development? Well, thanks for the introduction. I believe it's quite clear that language is a large topic for this world. That technology can help and how it can help is something that wasn't all that clear. And if we can be successful as a company, that's also not that obvious. Would you have asked me in 2017? I think I would have had a question mark about that. But the need for all of us to communicate, to talk with each other, that is there. And we as a company focus more on the business world, that it's very necessary there, and that quality and fluidity of language matter a lot for companies. That's something that was always clear. We just needed to check how can we develop the product and the company in a way that it helps the people really in that area. Somebody who is self-employed or privately on the platform, up to a DAX Fortune 500 company in the US that needs to internationalize or localize something. Privately, I was never a language genius in school, I have to say. If you would have asked my teachers in school, German, Polish, they probably would have never believed that I would have anything to do with language in the future. But the topic is actually mostly mathematical. It's powered by AI. Nevertheless, with my Polish and German background, I think I understood quite quickly how important different languages are. And Cologne is close to France, so I think that also helps us, also the employees, to understand what the problem really means. If since it's a digital product based on data, where does your instinct as an entrepreneur play a big role in how you design DeepL in its different functions? And data analysis, what can you learn about your users or other users about what they really are interested in, how the product should work, and how language works in a professional context? Well, that's a very broad field. It depends if we look at a single user or if we look at companies. The needs are often different. If I use DeepL, you use DeepL, or someone of you want a quick translation, a product which is easy to use, something where you can actually work with the translation and maybe improve it a bit, because each one of them is a bit special and you don't really want to take on what the AI has generated for us. I appreciate that, but if you look at companies, the answers are different. It's about how can we make one shared common language across the whole company. The company has a brand, which is at best embedded into the language of all of the employees, because that gives a homogeneous picture. And thus, the research methods, how we find out what our users or our customers need, are different. We do everything from A/B tests. We try to check what works well with our users. We do interviews. We talk with hundreds, thousands of people. But also the big companies, we're having a vivid exchange with them. We already talked about Cologne being the main headquarters. But to show the distribution a bit more clearly, if I researched this correctly, more than 120,000 companies, institutions, and private people use you in a number of markets in which language works quite differently. Maybe you can say something about it in how many languages you can use your product. I think it's 33, but it's growing a lot. We are putting a new focus on Asian languages. We started with Europe, but now the Asian markets have become quite interesting for us because the language barrier there is quite large. And the economic exchange between the countries within Asia, but also between Asia and Europe and the US, is quite big. And we have to see that we have local teams, that we have teams there on the ground that can talk to the customers, that can represent us, and that can also give us back the feedback, what works well in Japan, what doesn't. German, we can check here. With other European languages also, but when it becomes a bit more exotic, it's also more difficult. Yeah, and also maybe not all the markets are structured in the same way. I can only say from my own use case, from science, there are good glossaries for law or administration. Things are a bit different of where the requests come from. So you are in Europe, we are at Republica, and you could play a bit bingo with the world digital sovereignty. So there's strengths and weaknesses in founding here. GDPR, conformity, EU regulations, all of these things are probably factors also on your website in the outreach. What about trust in AI? Cultural questions, what role does that play for you? Well, it's as well a technical as a cultural question that is demanded by society, by our customers, by companies, and the technical follows. Trust is very important when it comes to AI. I think the more powerful AI is becoming in the future, the more important it's going to become. Because depending on what AI does and how powerful it is going to become, the use cases are going to become more and more valuable. There's a difference if you want to translate an email quickly, check it and send it to someone, or if you want to translate a contract and sign it without checking it first and keep working with that. So there are, of course, very different rules for the different use cases. And that means what follows is we as a company are orienting ourselves towards matching up to this trust. Yeah, you're a European unicorn for machine-driven translation. Maybe it's also valuable to differentiate. Are you an LLM? Do you have an LLM? Are you in the same business model? Yeah, well, it's a complicated technical question, actually, because the way how we generated models and the AA models that we trained, starting in 2017 over the years, they're not very different from the LLMs that we see nowadays. The technology, generally speaking, is quite similar. The details are different, but the area is the same. In the past year, we switched over our platform towards LLMs that we built ourselves. They're not generalist. They're not for everything. They can't do everything. They're actually built to translate, or if it's about DeepL Write, our writing product, to make language better or be a creative help when writing. So the technology underneath is the same, but it's trained for a different use case. And when you check infrastructure a bit more, we already heard a bit about the technical specifications. There is the recommendation to have a model that's also financed publicly. With you, it's a bit more interesting that you chose to be financed through international VCs. You didn't take any other money. Was there a strategy or necessity? Actually, I have to say I am a fan of the private market for financing. I believe once you have a good idea, once you have a good team, and once you can actually prove that more or less well, proofs can be different depending on the size of the company, sure, but then you should be able to find your financialization on the market. If you can't find it, it's also a statement how good you're placed as a company. And I think the markets work quite well. VCs are experienced in making companies grow and help them grow. And that was a conscious choice. And we also consciously chose the investors that are a part of us. We picked well. We tried to choose consciously. It's actually similar to hiring employees. You want investors that are good for you, that have similar values than your own company, and perhaps also have a similar style, because possibly I need to work with them every day on the board. Well, not daily, but work with them. And you want to have a person that you can trust and with whom you can work together well. And when you look at that on a global scale, you have to say the investors come from Europe, from the US, a tiny part also from Asia. The market is quite big, and if you have a good standing as a company, you can make use of this market quite well. That's the financial resources. We already heard the digital minister this morning, and I think the plan is that incentives should be created for more founders like you. So let's talk about other requirements for this. Maybe you can say more about the requirements for innovation or the prerequisites. Hardware is a question of money mainly, and the big hardware producers, well, NVIDIA is the leader there. You can't get around them. they're usually happy to help a company if you bring the necessary financial funds. So I think financing is the most important question in the beginning. When it's about the side of regulations, yes, you can build a company also in Europe. We're a great example for that. A bit more regulations or bureaucracy in Europe does not impede that, but you do have to think. The more a company is subject to regulations, the more will probably go towards other markets because their innovation or progress is easier. And AI is one of those fields where you have to stay on the ball the whole time, or else it doesn't really work and you're falling back.
Since we've all come together here and maybe some of the co-workers of some of the ministers are still here, is there something that you would wish for? I think my biggest ask would be technology or the technological industry should be elevated to a higher level. And we've always said we're an industrialized nation, and we have a very export-oriented economy, but we definitely need more technological companies for the future, and these companies need to be enabled to apply this AI in the future, and thus I would ask that in the future it should gain some more spotlight. So what we build in the realm of AI and around that whole ecosystem gains some more public exposure within society. That would help a lot. And I think France is really showing how it's done. Paris, for example, is now viewed as a technological epicenter these days. It's also kind of a cheap way to have some effect. You don't need a lot of money. It's mostly about publicity, about PR, about the press, and you can still achieve a lot. I would, as a scientist, with the expected boom, and since growth and scaling isn't always the greatest thing, there's always pressure there. You have doubled in size since the last 15 months. How are you dealing with that expectation and the pressure that is upon you? You've not been traded publicly yet, so, well, I mean, we're not traded publicly, but that doesn't mean that there's no pressure. There is always pressure. And it's not clear always how to do this. I still feel a lot of responsibility for the investors and the money that they invested in us. We usually talk about invested, but in the end, I mean, this could be our pension system that is investing in us. So we're in the end responsible for pensions, possibly. And we speak to everybody, to customers, to interested parties, other stakeholders. And that is actually hard for me. But as a founder and as a CEO, that's something you just have to do. It's part of the job. And it's nice to see myself grow in this role and to walk that path. And I actually would recommend it to anyone who's interested. But don't fool yourself. Psychologically, emotionally, it's not easy. And what does it feel for you that you're the AI poster child of Europe? And I mean, clearly that doesn't alleviate any of the pressure, it just makes it worse. But obviously we're proud of it, and it's nice to help out and to be part of that process. And if I hear from the other founders that they read about us and they've seen us, and you were courageous enough to go up against the big companies in the US in the technological arena, and that makes me proud, that makes me glad that we can give something back to the ecosystem, that we can help them out. Thank you. Are there also connections to politics, for example, or to other countries that you may need for example, building up infrastructure? Is that something that you've grown in the last years, or? I'm not active too much in that area, but clearly the company growing in size has become more visible. But I'm also enjoyed being a small company, and there are a lot of small companies, but also as a startup, we just know that a lot of them die, and that's okay, and that should be that way, because if that's not the case, then we're not daring, then we're not building risky things. So not everybody can deal with all of the small companies, but the moment you grow, you become more visible, and we actually do like to step into the spotlight, and we want to help Germany out and Europe to become stronger in this arena. And sorry, my time is running out, but I need to be quick. And I've still got two questions that I want to ask. One is very dear to my heart because I'm really a proponent of open source, and that's very important to me. You're using data that is publicly available in a freemium model, for example, company homepages, maybe social media networks, but you have not published any open source models. And DeepL is a proprietary product, and it does have APIs, but there's a limitation about the features, and it's not very open. So why are you actually very strategic about having it closed? And is there no aspect to growth to it if you would open it? Well, the market that we're in is dominated by big players that have a lot of power in that market and that have gigantic resources for research. And it's not just about the research, but it's also the market entry that we're looking at. Every company is basically tied to Microsoft, Google, Amazon in some way or other. And these other players we need to hold at bay. And we need to be very deliberate about what is good for us. And we need to see where we can still ensure the economic success that we need. And if we would really open source our models, then this would be very challenging. And that could lead to a point where they reach feature parity in the translation, and that then they would just switch to our open source model that we put a lot of research and money into. So this would be very difficult for us. Whereas if we have a proprietary system, we can be very deliberate about what product we offer to the market, what the limits are to the usage, for example, how many words they can translate every day. So this is just economic calculus behind that. And it is important to be clear about if you do research at the forefront, then you need economic success. Otherwise, there is no basis for the future in order to reinvest and to stay at that frontier. Okay, so now let's look back at the very large questions of society. For example, if you have geopolitical changes, the role of languages are changing. You're working with text at the moment. There are also technologies that work audio. Are we losing some understanding of nuances and the finer points of language the more we hand that over to the machines? And what is your vision for a world in there is real-time translation, for example, the bubblefish from literature? Where does that lead us? We are actually doing that already. With DeepL Voice, we can translate audio, and that is actually a little bit more impressive even. So, for example, when I sit in a meeting with a customer in Japan, and I easily can follow what is being said, and I can talk to the customer. There is no barrier, and that is absolutely impressive. I find this really fascinating. And for the global economy, this will be another spark of growth, and that might work against the closing of the markets that the US is currently leading, and that allows for more cooperation that we all really need around the world right now. And whether I believe that Babelfish, or DeepL Voice as we call it, do I believe that it will take over all of communication? I actually don't think so. I still enjoy talking to my old colleagues in school from back in the day in Poland, to talk to them in Polish, and it still allows me to connect to the culture. It gives me understanding. It shows my appreciation for other cultures and countries. And I find this really fascinating, that this technology for translation that we're building, we are actually helping people the teaching of languages in their own countries, because otherwise some societies are under pressure because they're very small and their language is not relevant enough. And for example, my kids by now speak better English than German, and that may not be something you want, whereas if we help them keep their local language, then we can actually help them out. So thank you very much. Everything is about communication, but sorry, we won't have time for a Q&A, but maybe you're still around and people can ask you questions, and people now know a lot about DeepL, the mythical origins, and also a few numbers. And I'm very grateful for you for taking the time to talk about it, about this ever-changing and very dynamic technology. And I would have loved to go towards how the labor market is moving, and I heard that you're working together with professional simultaneous translators, and so improving the collaboration, so that may be a very nice high note to end on. Thank you for your time, and thank you for this talk.